Everyone in the hospital whispered that our new nurse was a murderer because patients kept dying under her watch. But in reality, she was the only one who noticed the disturbing pattern behind the deaths, and what she uncovered exposed a horrifying truth no one else dared to see. The morning a new nurse stepped onto our intensive care unit, 24 seasoned nurses suddenly found their mobile devices utterly captivating. Patricia, our charge nurse, announced Riley's arrival, stating she needed someone to guide her. The silence that followed was absolute. I should have understood the unspoken message, but I volunteered anyway. 5 minutes later, Maria pulled me into the supply room. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed. "That's the nurse from St. Mary's. She administered 10 times the insulin dose. The patient died. They couldn't definitively prove it was her fault. Some transcription error, they said. Utter nonsense, but everyone knows. St. Mary's reassigned her to medication duties, and she transferred here to escape. Distance yourself immediately." Yet, something during Riley's orientation felt amiss. She meticulously verified every medication, posing safety questions that highlighted deficiencies in our own established protocols. Her technique was flawless, her hands as steady as a surgeon's. When she identified a substance interaction that pharmacy had overlooked, I realized the whispers didn't align with reality. My colleagues made her professional life unbearable. Patricia assigned her every weekend, holiday, and night shift. Her equipment mysteriously disappeared. Her access badge was deactivated weekly. During shift handovers, nurses scrutinized every detail she documented, forcing her to re-verify vital signs while others exchanged knowing glances. She was given the most challenging patients, the aggressive ones, those seeking illicit substances. But Riley never faltered. She anonymously brought cookies for the unit, covered shifts without being asked, diligently restocked supplies, and quietly corrected 3 medication errors made by other nurses. When Maria's son was hospitalized, Riley took all her shifts without a word. Dr. Kilmingham, our highly respected attending physician, was particularly harsh. "Given your past, perhaps someone else should manage the insulin," he'd remark in front of patients. However, I began to notice something peculiar. Kilmingham frequently confused patients, calling them by incorrect names, forgetting even basic procedures. When I mentioned this to Maria, she chuckled. "He's been here for 30 years. He's earned the right to be a bit forgetful. Besides, he's the only doctor who remembers our birthdays and brings donuts every Friday." Everyone adored him. The man was beyond reproach. One night, everything changed. We were a skeleton crew, just 3 nurses. Multiple trauma cases arrived, and our 3rd nurse was pulled to the emergency room. Then, simultaneously, a post-operative cardiac patient in room 8 crashed, while room 12 experienced respiratory failure. I was already managing 2 intubated patients. Kilmingham was unreachable. Rapid response was occupied in the ER. Both patients were deteriorating rapidly. I rushed to the cardiac patient, initiating medications, but needed assistance with chest compressions. Then Riley appeared. "I'll take room 12. You focus here." She sprinted down the corridor. We saved both lives. Kilmingham finally arrived, disoriented and enraged. "Push 10 of AP, he commanded. Riley stepped forward. "That's 10 times the correct dose." He exploded. "How dare you question me?" She remained resolute, asking me to confirm the accurate dosage before administration. She documented his attempted order as he watched. The next morning, Patricia confronted me. Kilmingham had lodged a complaint regarding Riley's insubordination. "Given her history, we cannot have her undermining physicians," Patricia stated. "You're a capable nurse. Do not let her compromise your standing." They suspended her and had security escort her out as if she were a criminal. 3 days later, Mr. Williams, a stable cardiac patient who had been improving, coded and died. By evening, rumors circulated that Riley had been obsessively monitoring him before her suspension. Someone posted, "She knew he was going to die." A WhatsApp group formed, "Protect our patients from Riley." A petition gained signatures. The collective had found their antagonist. Something about Williams' medical record troubled me. Medication alterations I didn't recall. When I attempted to access his complete file, it was sealed. I messaged Riley. Hours later, I found her in her car on parking garage level 3. "Can't go home," she murmured. She was surrounded by patient charts, her laptop open, coffee cups everywhere. She was trembling. "No one will believe me. I'm the nurse who takes lives." She completely broke down. "My mother won't speak to me. She says I've brought dishonor upon our family. Every time I close my eyes, I see that patient from St. Mary's. You're the only one who doesn't perceive a monster." Then she wiped her eyes and opened her laptop. But I uncovered something. She displayed spreadsheets tracking medication changes. Every patient whose condition worsened had their medications adjusted by Kilmingham. "Look at the dosages," she urged. "Basic calculation errors. The patterns were horrifying. Mr. Williams. Kilmingham changed his cardiac medications 3 times in 2 days, increasing the dose each time. Last month, he ordered 10 times the insulin. I refused to administer it. The patient survived. He wrote me up. She pulled up more files. 7 patients in 3 months. Incorrect substances, missed allergies. He becomes confused, forgets which patient is which, fails to recognize nurses he's worked with for years. Then she delivered the shocking revelation. That patient at St. Mary's. Kilmingham was the consulting physician. He verified the insulin order, 10 times the dose. But they focused on me, the new graduate who administered it. They couldn't prove fault without admitting their revered doctor made the mistake. She showed me an email draft to the medical board. I've documented everything. But who believes the demoted nurse over the doctor everyone worships? Her voice cracked. He's not malicious. I believe Dr. Kilmingham has dementia, and the hospital is aware. You will not believe what happened next. I stared at the evidence on her screen, my hands shaking. The parking garage suddenly felt frigid, the concrete walls closing in. Riley clicked through more files, each one more incriminating than the last. Patient after patient, error after error, all linked to Kilmingham's directives. I watched her fingers move swiftly across the keyboard, retrieving audit logs and medication records. The timestamps narrated a story no one wanted to hear. Kilmingham had been accessing the system at unusual hours, altering orders he had already placed, sometimes contradicting himself within minutes. Riley minimized the spreadsheet and opened another folder. Photographs of handwritten notes, Kilmingham's distinct script becoming increasingly erratic in recent months. Some entries made no sense, mixing up substance names, confusing patients from entirely different units. My phone vibrated. Patricia was texting about tomorrow's schedule. I ignored it, leaning closer to Riley's laptop screen. She pulled up security footage timestamps showing Kilmingham entering the hospital at 3 a.m. when he was not scheduled, wandering the halls looking lost. Riley rubbed her eyes, exhaustion etched into every movement. She had been living in her car for 3 days, fearing reporters might find her at home. The back seat was piled with blankets and fast food wrappers. A photo of her mother was taped face down on the dashboard. She reopened her email draft to the medical board, adding more documentation. Her hands trembled as she typed. I observed her obsessively updating it, adding evidence, removing emotional language, striving for objectivity and professionalism despite everything. The elevator chimed in the distance. We both froze. Riley swiftly closed her laptop and sank into her seat. Footsteps echoed through the garage, drawing nearer. My heart pounded as I recognized the shuffling gait. Kilmingham appeared between the cars, fumbling with his badge, attempting to scan it in thin air as if there were a door. He looked confused, repeatedly checking his watch. When he saw us, his expression shifted from bewilderment to recognition, then to something more sinister. He approached Riley's car, tapping on the window. She reluctantly lowered it a few inches. Kilmingham leaned in, his cologne overpowering in the confined space. His hands trembled slightly, a detail I had never noticed before. He spoke to Riley, but kept glancing at me as if trying to recall who I was. He called me Jennifer, then quickly corrected himself. Jennifer had been a nurse here 5 years ago. His words were precise, but his eyes darted nervously, unfocused. Riley gripped the steering wheel tighter with each word he uttered. He mentioned something about proper channels for concerns, about reputation and years of service. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. He referenced a protocol we had discontinued 3 years ago, insisting it was current policy. After he departed, shuffling back toward the elevator, Riley finally exhaled. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. The strong, composed nurse who had saved lives while being tormented was barely holding herself together. She showed me one more item on her laptop, a folder labeled before. Photos of Kilmingham from years past, sharp, focused, brilliant. Teaching residents, saving lives, the doctor everyone admired. The contrast to his current state was heartbreaking. I made a decision that would alter everything. I told Riley to email me everything, that I would assist her in presenting it appropriately. She looked at me with such hope it pained me. As I transferred the files to my phone, I understood I was choosing her over everyone else I worked with. Back in the ICU the next morning, I felt the weight of my knowledge. I watched Kilmingham struggle with simple tasks. I saw Patricia seamlessly cover for him. I noticed how the entire system shielded him. During rounds, he misidentified 2 patients. No one corrected him. I attempted to speak with Patricia privately, choosing my words carefully, mentioning concerns about patient safety, suggesting Kilmingham might need support. She immediately interrupted me, her expression hardening, reminding me about loyalty, about not believing every story from troubled nurses. The conversation was overheard by the night shift, who had arrived early. Within hours, the unit gossip portrayed me as defending the killer nurse. Whispers followed me down hallways. Maria avoided eye contact during report. My assignment sheet showed the heaviest patient load I had received in years. Patricia summoned me to her office that afternoon. She closed the door, sitting behind her desk like a general preparing for conflict. She offered me something unexpected, the charge nurse position on the day shift. Better hours, a significant salary increase, leadership experience. All I had to do was distance myself from Riley and her conspiracy theories. The offer hung in the air between us. I considered my student loans, my apartment rent, my mother's medical expenses. Patricia watched me deliberate, a faint smile playing on her lips. She knew precisely what she was doing. My phone buzzed. Riley texted that she had found more evidence and needed help organizing it. At that exact moment, the code blue alarm sounded. Room 15. One of Kilmingham's patients. Patricia stood, waiting to see my choice. I ran to the code, professional instinct overriding everything else. The patient was in full arrest. Kilmingham was already there, shouting orders. I noticed his hands shaking as he tried to draw up medication. He tapped the syringe repeatedly, the same unconscious gesture I had seen him make before administering the wrong dose to another patient. The code lasted 40 minutes. We resuscitated the patient, but barely. Afterward, I was exhausted, drenched in sweat, my hands cramping from compressions. I checked my phone to find multiple missed calls from Riley. By the time I could respond, she texted that it was too late. Patricia had used those 40 minutes wisely. She had messaged Kilmingham's wife about concerns being raised about her husband. The wife, a prominent hospital benefactor, was already making calls. The protective machinery was activating. The next 12 hours became a nightmare of escalating crises. Medications vanished from the Pyxis system, all last accessed by my login. Security footage would later show my badge being used, though I had been in patient rooms at those times. Someone had duplicated my access. Riley's car was being towed from the garage. She had exceeded the visitor parking time limit. I ran outside, attempting to intervene, arguing with the driver. He recorded me on his phone as I raised my voice, demanding he release the vehicle. I could see the USB drive containing evidence sitting on her passenger seat, locked inside, as the car was hauled away. Kilmingham's wife arrived at the hospital, tears streaming, speaking of harassment and jealousy. She went directly to administration. Within an hour, security was reviewing footage of my aggressive behavior with a tow truck driver. The narrative was being rewritten in real time. During evening rounds, Kilmingham casually referred to a medication protocol we had abandoned years ago. Most staff attributed it to his old-school ways. But I knew better. He was trapped in the past, his mind lingering in earlier times when he was sharp and capable. My phone rang. My daughter, a nursing student, called to say how wonderful Kilmingham's guest lecture had been at her school, how inspiring he was, how much he cared about the next generation. She couldn't comprehend why I sounded distressed. Kilmingham had mentioned nurses who didn't appreciate experienced physicians. The USB drive haunted me. All that evidence locked in Riley's car, now in some impound lot. I later learned the tow truck driver was Patricia's cousin. Small town, close connections, everyone protecting their own. My recent computer activity was flagged. Multiple accesses to closed charts, all of Kilmingham's former patients. Each lookup now appeared suspicious, as if I were building a case. They were correct, but the context was wrong. I was striving to save lives, not destroy careers. The following morning, the hospital pharmacist required Kilmingham's signature for a controlled substance audit. The discrepancies span months. Kilmingham signed without reading. His signature now just a shaky scrawl. The pharmacist said nothing, filing the papers. Another component in the protective mechanism. Breakroom gossip reached a new low. Someone recalled I had attempted to report concerns about Dr. Chun at my previous job. That situation had been different, but sufficiently similar. The pattern was clear. I was a troublemaker, someone who targeted respected physicians. The fact that Chun had later been found negligent was irrelevant. Screenshots from the unit's WhatsApp group began circulating. My supportive text to Riley, taken out of context, was reframed as conspiracy planning. Someone had been taking screenshots of private conversations for weeks, constructing a case against both of us. I tried accessing William's chart again, searching for the medication changes Riley had documented. Access denied, flagged as inappropriate access after patient death. My electronic footprint was being used against me. Each click further evidence of my obsession. Kilmingham still held senior physician privileges in the system. He could view schedules, see who was working when. The audit logs from before Riley's suspension showed her checking William's medications hourly. To others, it appeared to be suspicious behavior. To me, It looked like a nurse trying to prevent a tragedy. Double shifts were wearing me down. Exhaustion led to carelessness. I misread a medication labeled during rounds. I caught it before administration, but not before other nurses noticed. The whispers intensified. If I couldn't read labels correctly, why should anyone believe my concerns about Kilmingham? My closest friend on the unit, Sandy, pulled me aside. She told me she believed me, but could not support me publicly. She had just purchased a house and could not risk her employment. Legal protections against retaliation were meaningless when they could invent other reasons to dismiss you. She hugged me and walked away. Even the cafeteria workers avoided eye contact. I was now one of the Kilmingham attackers. Someone had initiated a Facebook prayer group for him, asking for divine protection from false accusations. The post went viral within our medical community. Colleagues from other hospitals commented, offering support to Kilmingham. During a particularly chaotic shift, Kilmingham made a confused statement about Williams needing more medication. The timestamp aligned perfectly with chart entries, but only by coincidence. He had been speaking about a different patient entirely, mixing up room numbers again. But to everyone else, it proved he had been correct all along. My preceptor from years ago admitted she required Kilmingham's recommendation letter for her nurse practitioner program application. She could not afford to be associated with anyone questioning him. Another ally lost. Another connection severed by proximity to the truth. Every chart access I had made in recent weeks was being scrutinized. My attempts to find patterns in Kilmingham's errors now appeared as if I were building a case for personal reasons. Each click was documented, timestamped, flagged. My electronic trail, intended to protect patients, looked like an obsession with destroying a good doctor. The breaking point arrived when someone saw me smile after uncovering a piece of evidence. Taken out of context, it appeared as though I was pleased by patient deaths. The rumor spread like wildfire. The nurse who smiles when patients die. The monster had a new face, and it was mine. Riley texted me late that night. They were offering her a choice: psychiatric evaluation or immediate termination. The hospital's lawyer had meticulously crafted it. If she chose evaluation, it would be permanently documented. If she refused, it would be perceived as an admission of instability. Either way, she was ensnared. I sat in my car after that shift, rereading her text. We were both trapped now, caught in a system designed to protect itself. Kilmingham would continue making errors. Patients would suffer, and anyone who spoke up would be destroyed. The machinery was too vast, too well-oiled, too invested in its own narrative. But I could not stop. Somewhere in that hospital, Kilmingham was likely confusing another patient's medications. Another family was about to lose a loved one. Another nurse would have to live with following orders they knew were incorrect. The evidence existed, locked in an impounded car, buried in computer systems, hidden in the memories of staff too afraid to speak. I texted Riley back, telling her we would find another way. There had to be another way. The parking garage where this all began felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been days. Days of watching a system protect itself while patients paid the ultimate price. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Kilmingham's wife was rallying supporters. Patricia was documenting every perceived infraction, building a case about inappropriate chart access. The walls were closing in, but the truth remained the truth. Kilmingham had dementia, the hospital knew, and patients were dying. I drove home knowing everything was about to worsen. But I also knew I could not stop now. Riley needed someone to believe her. The patients needed someone to protect them. And Kilmingham, the brilliant doctor he had once been, deserved better than to be enabled into harming the very people he had dedicated his life to saving. The true tragedy was not that Kilmingham was ill. It was that everyone knew and chose reputation over lives. Tomorrow, I would have to choose again. Keep fighting and lose everything, or remain silent and lose myself. Some choices are not truly choices at all. Kilmingham's wife began volunteering in the ICU family lounge the following week. She brought homemade cookies, sat with grieving families, and recited the same prayer Kilmingham had offered over dying patients years ago when his mind was sharp. My colleagues embraced her presence. She learned their children's names within days, remembered their birthdays, and brought their favorite coffee orders. The woman was assembling an army of loyalty, one small act of kindness at a time. Patricia and I ended up in human resources together after I reported concerns about Kilmingham's cognitive state. We sat across from the director, recounting the same conversation with differing accounts. Patricia swore I had threatened to ruin Kilmingham's career out of jealousy. I maintained I had only expressed patient safety concerns. They administered polygraph tests. We both passed. The truth had become subjective, shaped by perspective and allegiance. An elderly patient I had cared for mentioned overhearing me plotting against Kilmingham. The man's eyes were clear, his memory intact. He told Patricia I had been discussing ways to frame the good doctor. When I checked his chart later, Kilmingham had adjusted his medications 3 times that week. The patient's sudden clarity about conversations that never occurred made more sense. But pointing that out would only deepen suspicions about my motives. Another patient, a grandmother with dementia, began telling visitors the mean nurses were trying to harm Dr. Kilmingham. She claimed Riley had told her I was jealous of him. Riley had been suspended before this patient was even admitted. The timeline did not align, but the damage was done. Families began requesting different nurses, anyone but the troublemakers. Security footage from before Riley's suspension showed her frequently checking on Williams, frame by frame. It appeared damning, a nurse hovering over a patient who would later die. No one wanted to hear that she had been monitoring Kilmingham's medication changes, attempting to prevent an error without direct confrontation. The video told the story they needed it to tell. The hospital lawyer summoned me for a meeting about following proper channels for concerns. He sat behind his mahogany desk, explaining liability and defamation while I thought about patients dying from preventable errors. His words were carefully chosen, technically not threats, but unmistakably warnings. The legal department had mobilized to protect the institution. I discovered Kilmingham had left himself logged into a workstation one evening. His last search caught my breath. How to report memory problems in colleague. The search was dated 3 months prior. He knew something was wrong with his mind, but could not figure out how to seek help without destroying everything he had built. I cleared the browser history, protecting him, even as I gathered evidence against him. Kilmingham's wife's Facebook posts about attacks on her dedicated husband went viral in the medical community. Thousands of healthcare workers shared her words, adding their own stories about young nurses who didn't respect experienced physicians. The narrative was now immutable. We were the villains in a story about protecting a hero. My employee assistance counselor was obligated to report concerning statements about colleagues. I had made the mistake of being honest during what I believed was a confidential session. Within hours, Patricia knew I had discussed Kilmingham's cognitive decline with a mental health professional. Another mark against my credibility, another indication of my obsession. I attempted to record Kilmingham's confusion during rounds, holding my phone discreetly, but he spotted it. He had one of his lucid moments. He asked if I was recording an old man's rambling, his eyes sharp and knowing. The moment passed, confusion returning, but the damage was done. He would remember the betrayal even if he forgot everything else. A shift change meeting forced me to choose between covering Kilmingham's patients or attending Riley's termination hearing. 7 critical patients under Kilmingham's care, all with recent medication changes I did not trust. But Riley sat alone in a conference room, facing termination without a single supporter. I chose the patients. Riley faced the panel alone. Anonymous OSHA complaints began inundating the hospital about our ICU. Someone was reporting every minor violation, creating a paper trail of problems in our unit. Nurses who might have spoken up chose job security instead. My friend admitted she had just purchased a house and could not risk unemployment. The fear was palpable, silencing even those who knew the truth. Kilmingham started using the same brand of lavender hand sanitizer Riley had always preferred. The distinctive scent triggered memories in patients and staff. Subtle psychological warfare, making everyone remember the suspended nurse whenever Kilmingham walked by. Whether intentional or coincidental, it worked. Patricia offered to overlook my HIPAA violation if I would sign a statement about Riley's erratic behavior. She had caught me accessing charts I should not have been reviewing. The choice was clear, my career or my integrity. I refused. She documented my response as not caring about unit morale and patient safety. I discovered I had been mistaken about which patient Kilmingham had confused during a critical incident. Security footage showed him entering a different room than I had remembered, but I was still correct about the medication errors. The truth was messier than I had realized, full of partial accuracies that caused my credibility to crumble. Williams had been documenting his concerns in a bedside journal we found among his belongings. His daughter brought it to the hospital, pages filled with notes about feeling worse after each medication change. Riley's suspicious behavior was actually her attempting to prevent Kilmingham's errors without direct confrontation. She had known Williams was documenting everything. My sister worked in hospital administration, but had already recused herself from anything involving Kilmingham. She met me privately, sharing her professional concerns about patterns she had noticed. She could not officially assist, but had observed the same troubling trends. She provided partial employee files with crucial dates redacted, breadcrumbs of truth in a feast of falsehoods. I began orchestrating encounters with Kilmingham's wife, learning her routines. We met accidentally at Kilmingham's favorite coffee shop. I discussed recipes while observing how she counted his pills, organized them in weekly containers, compensating for his confusion without acknowledging it. She was overwhelmed by caregiver burden while publicly defending him. An old quality report surfaced that Kilmingham had co-authored years ago. It addressed patterns of medication errors in the hospital, proposing solutions he now violated daily. His younger self would have been horrified by what he had become. The report became evidence of his cognitive decline, comparing past brilliance to present confusion. William's daughter emerged with a malpractice lawyer, asking questions about her father's care. The hospital machinery moved to contain the threat. Suddenly, my schedule shifted due to my demotion to the float pool, creating conflicts with mandatory training times. Each missed session was marked as non-compliance in my record. My overtime was frozen while I paid a lawyer to protect my license. Kilmingham continued earning his $400,000 salary while making errors that cost lives. The financial pressure escalated. I began using the hospital sleep room between shifts while Riley couch surfed after being evicted. We were being systematically dismantled. A tense conversation in the chapel was overheard by families who reported feeling uncomfortable. I had been discussing Kilmingham's errors with another nurse who was beginning to see the patterns, but to the families, it sounded like we were plotting against a good man. Security received another complaint about the troublemaking nurses. My demotion to float meant leaving the ICU I had worked in for years. My replacement was Kilmingham's former resident, someone who had trained under him and revered him. The message was unambiguous. Loyalty would be rewarded, questions punished. I packed my locker while colleagues avoided eye contact. My mother called, pleading with me to stop destroying Kilmingham's reputation. He had delivered me. He had saved my father during a heart attack 20 years ago. How could I attack the man who had given our family so much? She could not grasp that the brilliant doctor she remembered was gone, replaced by someone dangerous. My investigation was causing unintended harm. A young resident faced review for following Kilmingham's orders. She sobbed in the break room, explaining she had simply trusted him, as everyone said she should. Her engagement ended due to the stress and association with conspiracy nurses. I was ruining the careers of people who had done nothing wrong except believe in the system. I continued investigating despite the collateral damage. Each piece of evidence came at a cost. Another career damaged, another relationship destroyed. Riley asked if Kilmingham's wife might be right, if he was just tired from years of service. I could not answer immediately. Doubt was creeping in, making me question everything. To maintain credibility, I admitted to overlooking my own father's dementia signs years ago. The admission was tactical, but true. I had ignored his confusion, attributed forgetfulness to stress, enabled him until a car accident forced recognition. The parallel to Kilmingham was evident, making my current vigilance seem like compensation for past failures. Evidence revealed I had failed to report Kilmingham's first confusion episode months ago. I thought he was just exhausted after a difficult shift. My silence then undermined my urgency now. The medical board expedited Kilmingham's review, scheduling a hearing in 48 hours. My lawyer had food poisoning, leaving me to prepare alone. The investigation uncovered Kilmingham's 40-year legacy of teaching and healing. Thousands of lives saved, hundreds of residents trained, decades of excellence before the illness took hold. His need to continue working stemmed from identity loss and his wife's cancer treatment expenses. The hospital's insurance would cease upon his retirement. I had to use Kilmingham's illness against him to protect future patients. Every piece of evidence felt like a betrayal of the respect owed to elder colleagues. The compassionate nurse I had been was fading, replaced by a strategic whistleblower who documented every interaction, recorded conversations, built cases instead of relationships. Small victories felt hollow. The board initiated an inquiry, but Kilmingham wept in the hallway afterward. We stood on opposite sides of the meeting room door, both crying for different reasons. His tears were for a career ending in disgrace. Mine were for the patients who died while I gathered proof. The hospital's counter-complaint gained momentum. They depicted Riley and me as coordinating harassment against a distinguished physician. The evidence appeared damning when presented selectively. Two nurses with histories of reporting concerns, targeting a doctor whose only transgression was aging. The narrative constructed itself. Everything hinged on the medical board accepting patterns of errors as evidence of cognitive decline. Near misses did not count without documented harm. I began contacting families of Kilmingham's past patients who had survived his errors. Most refused to get involved, but two provided statements about close calls they had never reported. Kilmingham had mentioned feeling tired to a supervisor 6 months ago. She had documented it as burnout and recommended vacation. The hospital had concealed his self-report to avoid losing their star physician. He attempted to retire twice, but was persuaded to remain. The institution's need for his reputation outweighed his need for help. Final evidence came from Killingham's own documented concerns about his memory. Hidden in his office, I found notes he had written to himself, reminders about basic procedures, patient names crossed out and rewritten. He knew something was wrong, but continued working anyway, trapped between identity and reality. The evidence showed Killingham working extra shifts to fund his wife's cancer treatment despite his confusion. Every error traced back to financial desperation meeting cognitive decline. I realized justice meant accepting Killingham was a victim, too, failed by a system that should have protected him and his patients. I committed to holding the hospital accountable, not just Killingham. The institution's statement about their thorough review process contradicted the suppressed reports. The CEO had approved keeping Killingham despite documented concerns. The conspiracy was real, just different from what everyone imagined. Presenting evidence to the board meant walking a tightrope between justice and compassion. I spoke about Killingham's legacy while demonstrating his errors, honoring his career while proving he could not continue. His wife mouthed, "Thank you," from the gallery, understanding what others could not. She had known all along. Legal momentum shifted as institutional negligence became undeniable. The hospital's protection of Killingham, despite known concerns, opened floodgates of liability. Lawyers circled like sharks, sensing vulnerability. All parties prepared for the state medical board hearing that would determine everything. Key ICU staff were called to testify, revealing deep divisions within our unit. Seating arrangements in the hearing room displayed allegiances. Who knew what when? Who chose silence? Who chose patience? Killingham appeared confused even with medication, while Riley exhibited clear PTSD symptoms from her ordeal. Truth emerged through medical records and timeline reconstruction. Each error was mapped against Killingham's declining cognitive function. Patricia admitted under oath to protecting the hospital's reputation over patient safety. She could not lie to the board as she had lied to herself. The board ordered immediate practice restrictions pending full evaluation. An independent neurologist confirmed early-stage cognitive impairment with recent acceleration. Killingham's decline had intensified after his wife's cancer diagnosis 6 months prior. The stress had pushed manageable symptoms into dangerous territory. Evidence showed the hospital enabling impaired practice to maintain department rankings. Killingham's unit was profitable, his reputation valuable. One doctor's decline seemed worth a risk until lives began to be lost. The calculation was cold, corporate, and criminal in its disregard for human cost. Killingham's breakdown during testimony revealed the truth everyone had avoided. He knew something was wrong, but felt trapped by the system that had made him a hero. He tried to retire, tried to ask for help, but was met with reassurance instead of assessment. The very admiration people had for him had prevented them from saving him. The board asked for my recommendations on systemic changes. I requested mandatory fitness for duty evaluations when concerns were raised by multiple sources. I asked them to honor Killingham's career by preventing others from suffering. I asked them to create pathways for aging physicians to transition with dignity before cognition declined. Riley was reinstated with back pay and a formal apology. Killingham retired with his dignity intact. His legacy preserved despite the tragic conclusion. The ICU became fractured between those who had championed patients and those who had enabled the system. Half the staff transferred within months, unable to confront their participation. I rebuilt my career as a patient safety advocate, despite being blacklisted by many hospitals. Some bridges were burned, but my conscience was clear. The true cost was not professional, but personal. Relationships shattered, trust broken, innocence lost. But patients were safer, and that had to suffice. New policies were implemented requiring cognitive assessments when multiple concerns were documented. Killingham's Law, they unofficially called it. He would dislike the association with mandatory testing, but it was the most genuine honor possible, protecting future patients from preventable tragedies. The parking garage, where it all began, became my place of reflection. I would sit where Riley had shown me the evidence, remembering the moment everything shifted, the choice between comfortable falsehoods and uncomfortable truths, the decision to challenge a system designed to silence dissenters. Killingham received treatment for his cognitive impairment, medication that slowed but could not reverse the decline. His wife sent me a letter, thanking me for doing what she could not. She had watched him fade, enabled his denial, chosen love over truth until it was almost too late. The real antagonist was never Killingham, nor even the administrators who protected him. It was institutional indifference, a systemic preference for reputation over reality. A culture that made heroes of humans, then refused to acknowledge their humanity when they faltered. The parking garage felt different when I returned that night. Killingham's grandson waited by my car, his teenage face contorted with confusion and pain. He asked why I was harming his grandfather, the man who had taught him to tie surgical knots at age 10. I explained about patient safety while he recorded everything on his phone. Another piece of evidence against me. Another family member mobilized. The ICU had divided into two factions by morning. Those who had witnessed Kilmingham's errors firsthand versus those who clung to his legacy. The division was evident in everything, where people sat during breaks, who covered whose patients, which nurses assisted each other with difficult tasks. Years of teamwork dissolved into silent conflict. The medical board required documented patterns of harm for immediate action. Near misses and corrected errors were insufficient. I spent hours contacting families of Kilmingham's former patients, explaining my concerns, inquiring about their loved ones' care. Most immediately hung up. Two agreed to provide written statements about medication errors that had nearly claimed their mothers. Kilmingham had mentioned feeling tired to his supervisor 6 months earlier. I found the documentation buried in administrative files. She had noted it as normal burnout and suggested he take vacation time. The hospital had disregarded his attempt to signal distress, opting to preserve their star physician rather than investigate his concerns. The evidence I needed most was in Kilmingham's own office. Late one evening, I searched his desk and found handwritten notes to himself, reminders about basic procedures, patient names crossed out and corrected multiple times, medication calculations done and redone. He had been documenting his own decline, too proud or afraid to share it with anyone. Kilmingham had been working extra shifts to pay for his wife's cancer treatments. The insurance would end if he retired. Every error traced back to financial desperation, forcing him to work despite his failing mind. The system had trapped him between poverty and patient harm. I realized Kilmingham was as much a victim as the patients he had endangered. The hospital had failed him by ignoring obvious signs, enabling his practice despite concerns, prioritizing reputation over his well-being. My anger shifted from him to the institution that had created this tragedy. The CEO's signature appeared on multiple documents acknowledging Kilmingham's concerning behavior while approving his continued practice. The administration had made calculated decisions, weighing his profitable department against potential risks. They had gambled with lives and lost. Presenting evidence to the medical board required careful equilibrium. I honored Kilmingham's 4-decade career while documenting his recent errors, showcased his brilliant past through old case studies while proving his current incapacity through medication mistakes. His wife watched from the gallery, tears streaming as she silently mouthed words of gratitude. The hospital's lawyers attempted to portray Riley and me as coordinated harassers. They presented our text messages, chart accesses, and concerns as evidence of conspiracy. But under oath, their narrative crumbled. Too many witnesses had seen Kilmingham's confusion firsthand. Patricia's testimony became the turning point. Faced with perjury charges, she admitted to protecting the hospital's reputation over patient safety. She had documented Kilmingham's errors while publicly defending him. Her voice broke as she described choosing institutional loyalty over her nursing oath. The independent neurologist's evaluation was devastating. Kilmingham showed clear signs of early-stage dementia with recent rapid progression. The timeline matched his wife's cancer diagnosis 6 months prior. Stress had accelerated his decline from manageable symptoms to dangerous impairment. Evidence revealed the hospital had enabled Kilmingham's impaired practice to maintain department rankings and revenue. Internal emails showed administrators discussing his minor confusion as acceptable risk. They had weighed his profitable unit against patient safety and chosen money. Kilmingham broke down during his testimony. Through tears, he admitted knowing something was wrong, but feeling trapped. He had tried to retire twice, but was convinced to stay. The system that had made him a hero had prevented him from admitting weakness. His desperate attempts to self-correct had failed as his mind deteriorated. The medical board asked for my recommendations. I requested mandatory cognitive assessments when multiple staff raised concerns, suggested creating dignified transition pathways for aging physicians before impairment endangered patients, and asked them to honor Kilmingham's legacy by preventing future tragedies. Riley received full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. The hospital cleared her record and acknowledged she had acted appropriately in questioning dangerous orders. She returned to work showing clear trauma symptoms, hypervigilance, insomnia, difficulty trusting colleagues. Kilmingham retired immediately with disability benefits secured. His wife no longer had to fear losing insurance. He would keep his medical license with voluntary restrictions, preserving dignity while protecting patients. His decades of excellent care would not be erased by his final troubled months. The ICU fractured after the hearing. Nurses who had enabled Kilmingham's errors could not face those who had spoken up. Half the staff transferred within months. The unit that had worked together for years dissolved into strangers passing in hallways. I found myself blacklisted from several hospitals despite official vindication. Word spread through informal networks. I was the nurse who destroyed good doctors. My applications went unanswered. Interviews canceled without explanation. Patient safety advocacy became my sole career option. New policies emerged requiring cognitive assessments when concerns were documented by multiple sources. Unofficially called Kilmingham's Law, though he would dislike the association. The truest honor was protecting future patients from preventable tragedies. Kilmingham's treatment slowed, but could not reverse his cognitive decline. His wife sent me a letter months later, thanking me for doing what she could not. She had watched him deteriorate, enabled his denial, chosen love over truth until it was almost too late. Her words brought no comfort. The parking garage, where everything started, became my reflection space. I would sit where Riley had shown me evidence, remembering the moment I chose truth over comfort. The cost had been everything: friendships, career advancement, professional reputation. But patients were safer. William's family filed a malpractice suit against the hospital, not Kilmingham personally. They understood he had been failed by the system. The settlement funded a patient safety initiative, though no amount could restore their father. Kilmingham's former residents struggled with revelations about their mentor. Some defended him fiercely. Others admitted seeing signs they had ignored. The medical community grappled with how to honor his legacy while acknowledging his tragic end. My mother finally understood after reading the board's findings. Kilmingham had saved our family, but that heroic doctor was gone before I had acted. She apologized for doubting me, though our relationship remained strained by the ordeal. The young resident who had faced review for following Kilmingham's orders left medicine entirely. Her confidence shattered by the realization that trusting senior physicians could destroy careers. Another casualty of institutional failure. Riley returned to work, but never fully recovered. She triple-checked every medication, questioned every order, documented obsessively. The trauma of being scapegoated had fundamentally altered her practice. She was safer, but sadder. I encountered Kilmingham at the coffee shop 6 months later. He did not recognize me, asking if I was new to town. His wife gently redirected him, apologizing with her eyes. The brilliant physician who taught me was truly gone, replaced by a confused elderly man. The hospital implemented new systems, anonymous reporting mechanisms, mandatory peer review, cognitive assessment protocols, changes that should have existed before tragedy struck. Progress built on preventable death. My career pivoted to patient safety consulting. Hospitals hired me to identify systemic failures before they caused harm. I traveled between facilities, teaching staff to recognize cognitive decline in colleagues, creating cultures where concerns could be raised safely. Riley and I maintained contact through occasional texts. She had found stability in a smaller hospital where her history was unknown, still hypervigilant, but functioning. We never discussed those terrible months directly. The trauma was too fresh despite the passage of time. The ICU I had loved no longer existed. New staff filled positions, unaware of the history that had shaped current policies. Patricia retired early, unable to lead after her public admission of prioritizing reputation over safety. Kilmingham's wife became an advocate for physician wellness programs. She spoke at conferences about recognizing cognitive decline in medical professionals, transforming personal tragedy into systemic change. Her presentations always began with photos of Kilmingham in his prime, the doctor everyone aspired to be. Anonymous donations appeared in Riley's name at the nursing school. Someone was funding scholarships for students interested in patient advocacy. I suspected Kilmingham's wife, but never confirmed it. The medical board's final report became required reading in area hospitals. It detailed how institutional protection of impaired physicians endangered patients. Administrators were mandated to attend training on balancing respect for senior staff with safety obligations. My consulting work revealed similar situations nationwide. Beloved physicians practicing past cognitive capacity, enabled by protective systems. Each intervention felt like reliving my own trauma while preventing others. Kilmingham passed away 2 years later. His obituary celebrated 40 years of healing, teaching, and innovation. No mention of his final months or the controversy. His funeral overflowed with grateful patients, former students, and colleagues who remembered him at his best. Riley spoke at his funeral, surprising everyone. She honored the physician he had been while acknowledging the system that had failed him. Her words brought a closure neither of us had expected. Kilmingham's wife hugged her afterward, 2 women bonded by institutional betrayal. The parking garage was demolished for hospital expansion. I watched from across the street as concrete walls fell, taking with them the physical space where everything had changed. But the lessons remained. The cost of silence, the price of truth, the burden of choosing patience over politics. New nurses joined the ICU, knowing nothing of Kilmingham beyond the policies his case had created. They followed protocols designed to prevent his tragedy without understanding their origin. Safety built on sadness. Progress purchased with pain. I continued consulting, teaching, advocating. Each hospital visit reminded me why I had sacrificed everything. Somewhere in those facilities, another Kilmingham might be struggling. Another Riley might be seeing patterns others ignored. Another nurse might be choosing between comfort and conscience. The truth was simpler than any conspiracy. Good people trapped in flawed systems. Heroes becoming hazards. Love enabling harm. Kilmingham had not been malicious, just unwell. The hospital had not been evil, just misguided. But patients had died while everyone protected themselves. Justice arrived through persistence and pain. Kilmingham received treatment while facing consequences. Riley practiced again despite trauma. I found purpose in prevention. Families found closure in truth. The hospital prioritized patients over reputation, compelled by legal pressure and public shame. The true antagonist remained institutional indifference, systems valuing reputation over reality, comfort over compassion, silence over safety. Kilmingham was one confused physician among thousands enabled by protective cultures. Our story was unique only in its exposure.